as you have your team, your virtual assistant, etc., start these private messages in more of an organic way where it's personalized, short and sweet, no links, ask, don't tell. And the fifth thing, which is slow play.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What would you be missing out on if your podcast wasn't ranked? What would you truly be missing out on if you didn't get into the top charts? Is there anything you'd be missing out on? Is it just a vanity metric? I'm here to share with you today that by not getting ranked onto the top charts, it makes it really challenging to do the two things that podcasters truly want. And that is to make an impact and an income. By not ranking into the top charts, it can actually give you a huge challenge to be able to leave your legacy on the world, to add value to other people, to give back the way that you want. And it'll be challenging for you to be making money through your podcast as well. So today we're going to be sharing with you 535. 535 is the formula that's going to help you to actually get ranked. And we've seen it done with many different podcasts. So I know it's going to be able to work for you. So buckle in, take notes. And it comes down to 535. Now, the first 5 is the 5 things that you truly need to do in sequential order, in order to be able to actually make all of this happen. If these 5 things don't happen, your podcast literally won't rank. Or even if they happen, but in the wrong order, your podcast is not going to rank. There are some algorithms within Apple and Podkite and Chartable and Listen Notes and all of the other charts that you have found yourself on or found your friends on, or where you actually went to go to find other podcasts that are worth listening to. By doing these 5 things in this order, and I'm about to share those with you, you will be able to rank your podcast. Literally. And the 5 things are fairly simple. You've probably heard of some of them. Number 1, you need followers or subscribers. Depends on which era you can't come from. It's now called followers. So you need those. And those followers, not other people, not bots or anything like that, but those people that are following your podcast need to download the episodes. That's number 2. And those people that downloaded the episodes actually have to listen. Oh, what a concept. The algorithms will work against you. They'll hold you back if people are downloading it and not listening. They got to be playing the episode. And so the algorithms can check for that as well. That's number 3. 4th is to get that social proofing. Now, others would argue that the social proofing is not that important. I found that it is important if it's done right. It will benefit you to be able to find more listeners, to find more sponsors for your show, to be able to grow your podcast. So that social proofing, the ratings and or the written reviews are very helpful for a podcast. However, if those ratings or reviews are about just you and your personal character, it's not going to benefit you the way that it will benefit you if it's about the podcast. And the 5th thing of the first 5 is that people, those listeners, those subscribers, the people listening, need to come back to the podcast often. So again, those 5 are follow, download, listen, rate and review, and come back to the podcast. So the question is, how do we make sure that people are doing all of those? A Facebook ad's not going to do it. There's so many other types of marketing. And my company, actually, we do a lot of marketing for podcasts. And we found that so many different ways to promote a show, and not any of them, besides one that I'll share with you in a few minutes, not a single one of them is able to do all 5. They can get you followers, They can get a couple of people downloading. A few of those people might listen. Not very many of them are going to take action and leave rating or a review. And it could still be a challenge and a waste of money because that person's not coming back. Therefore, it works against you in the top charts because you have a high bounce rate or a low sticking rate to your show. So there is one marketing strategy that I'll mention to you right now, which is a private message campaign. Private messages meaning you going in and connecting with your actual avatar individually. And to take it a step further, rather than you specifically doing this, it could be beneficial for some type of third party so that it doesn't come across as self-promotion. In our company, we utilize virtual assistants. So write that down. It could be really helpful once you learn this strategy to have a third party doing it, to have your virtual assistant doing it instead of you personally doing it. If you're starting all of the conversations and bringing people to your podcast, it could come across as inauthentic. It could offend a couple of people, and you might actually start making people feel a little bit uncomfortable and having the opposite effect where they tell people bad things about your podcast instead of what the goal is for them to be hearing good things from third parties. So remember, it can be hugely beneficial once you learn the strategy that I'll share with you to have a third party, have your friend do it, have a virtual assistant do it, etc. So how do you do that? How do you find those perfect avatar? My company, what I found, we do it in 3 main places. And I hope you write these down so you guys can use this on your own podcast as well. Number 1, you can find people on meetup.com. You can narrow down your perfect avatar on meetup.com. If you're not already joined, you'll join. You'll connect with different people. There's a lot of ways to do this, but you'll send private messages to people that are in the groups and are active in the groups so that eventually you can let them know about the podcast, or your virtual assistant, for example, could let them know about your show. So the second platform of the 3, the middle number is 3, remember 535, is facebook.com. Facebook.com is wonderful, especially for this, because there are so many groups. There are so many groups on Facebook, nearly as many as you can find on meetup.com in your perfect genre. So what you'll do is you'll find those groups, you'll find the perfect avatar, the type of person that you need to attract to listening to your show through Facebook groups. The third platform that we've utilized is LinkedIn.com. LinkedIn is another platform that has a lot of groups, and also they have a really good capability for searching and narrowing down your search for individuals that meet a very finite criteria. So again, the 3 are the platforms: Meetup, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Now, what do you need to know when your team, your virtual assistant, your friend start supporting the podcast by doing private message campaign in order to do those first 5 things that we mentioned? Again, it's follow, download, listen, rate and review, and come back to the podcast. What do you need to know? Once you find those people on those 3 platforms that I mentioned, what do you need to know? Here's the 5 key takeaways for these private message campaigns. Number 1, they need to be short and sweet. The messages themselves need to be short and sweet. Number 2, you never send a link unless you have permission. Unless somebody asks for the link, you don't send links in private when you're DMing people, PMing people on these social media platforms. Number 3, you want to always be thinking about ask, don't tell. That means every single message needs to have a question. Stop going into the DMs and saying, my event's coming up. My podcast just dropped an episode. Don't tell people stuff anymore. Ask them. This is you engaging with your audience, or this is your team or a virtual assistant or any third party engaging with your audience. So ask, don't tell. No more telling people stuff on there. Ask them questions. Get to know them. Number 4 is personalized messages. You're only going to be able to personalize the message if you read their bio, if you read their profile. I come from a real estate investing background. And an example of this could be there's all sorts of real estate investing strategies and real estate businesses. For example, one of them, you could be wholesaling a house. Sounds crazy to some, but essentially you're taking control of a home and selling it to somebody quickly, and the seller gets a price, the buyer pays a price, and you get a small cut of the in-between. You're basically a wholesaler. You're supporting somebody who needs to get out of their house fast. So for example, I could go on a Facebook forum for real estate and talk about that same thing. I could look at their profile, see pictures of the kids. I could see that they had just done their first wholesale deal in real estate investing. And what I'll say is, hey, John, I'm going to use their name. I'm not going to say, hello, John. Hello is too formal. Hey, John, saw that you just did your first wholesale deal. That's awesome. How'd you get involved in that? Okay. That's the whole thing. And you're like, well, how does this help my podcast? As you have your team, your virtual assistant, etc., start these private messages in more of an organic way where it's personalized, short and sweet, no links, ask, don't tell. And the 5th thing, which is slow play. Slow play. In many cases, this strategy, although it's the only strategy that gives you all 5 of the things, it's the only strategy that'll make sure people are moving through, and you're hacking, you're triggering algorithms within Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Chartable, Podkite, all of these places where they are ranking podcasts and promoting podcasts on your behalf. You've got to slow play it. It might take you 3 to 6 months. So again, these pieces of the framework that you must remember as you're having someone do this direct message campaign for you is keep it short and sweet. Don't share a link unless somebody asks for it. Don't say, here's the link to my podcast. You wait and slow play it like you're dating and courting. You're not asking for the proposal the first time that you meet. You're taking your time. You're getting to know each other. It's the same exact strategy, but through the podcast. We want real, authentic relationships with people. We have found that that only will happen if you're following that advice, those 5 things. So now to finalize and finish off the takeaways for this short presentation to help you to be able to rank your podcast with a third party's help, I want to illustrate a little bit more of the private message campaign strategy so that your head is totally wrapped around it. Okay? Remember, here's the 5 things. Get them to follow, then download, then listen, then rate and review. That's social proof. And then come back to the podcast. Remember, there's 3 platforms that make it easy for you to find your avatar or your third party to find your avatar so that they can even start these conversations. That's Meetup, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And then remember these 5 things that are going to be essential. And you've always got to have your third party, your virtual assistant, think about these things or else you're going to mess it all up. And that's to keep them short and sweet. Don't share the links. Ask, don't tell, personalize, and slow play. So here's what it could look like. You already heard me in the real estate place say something to the effect of, hey, John, I saw that you just did your first wholesale. That's impressive. How did you learn how to get started with that? ? Then John's going to reply. John's going to say something. He's going to say, oh, this is where I learned it. I learned it from this podcast. I learned it from this one place. And then you'll respond to that individually, personalize it. This isn't a bunch of copy and paste. This isn't as simple as just having a templated copy and just pasting it to 1,000 people. You're going to get flagged if you do that. Meetup will only let you do one at a time. Facebook, once you hit 6, they're going to kick you off. And same thing with LinkedIn. Once you do a couple in a row where it's copy and paste, they're going to kick you off. So we're not doing that. As we go through this, and I mentioned it could take between 3 and 6 months to have the full effect where John, the real estate person, ends up subscribing to the podcast. It could take many months, but this is the way to make sure we're triggering the algorithm, allowing you to be ranked in the top charts so more people can find you. And it's fairly inexpensive for you to do as long as you have the right team member to do it. After John replies, oh, I learned it this way, you'll respond in a personal way and say, thank you, John, I really appreciate it. Out of curiosity, and then you ask another question. John comes back with a response, and then you come back with a question. You might wait a couple of weeks. My team generally waits a couple of weeks after about that 4th response. And then you'll have your team or your VA or whomever, your wife, your husband, etc. You'll have them reach out maybe a couple weeks later, which is great because this just gives some time between things. And then they might just say, hey, have you ever heard of the XYZ podcast? Question. Have you ever heard of this podcast? Most often, and hate to hurt your feelings, they'll most often say no. Even when my team does this for my podcast, many people in my space, many of my avatar have said, actually, no, I've never heard of that podcast. So you're going to have to deal with that. Once they've responded, you'll go back with another question and you'll say something to the effect of, well, he dropped a really good episode about doing this thing that you talked about. Generally speaking, when you refer to the podcast, when your virtual assistant or whatever refers to the podcast episode, I'd love to have it where it has something to do with what John already said. He mentions, oh, I learned this through podcasting, or I learned this through real estate investing associations that I'm a part of. I learned this through my coach, my mentor that I paid. Well, then you're going to go and find an episode, or you'll have your third party do this, find an episode that talks a little bit about some of the things that John's already talking about. And that's when you send it a couple weeks later. Hey, have you heard of the XYZ podcast? John says no. And you respond, there was a really great episode that I listened to today, and it had something to do with what you talked about. So you mentioned that. And I thought you might like to listen to it. Question mark. Now, maybe John will respond. He won't always say, yes, please. But sometimes he does. Sometimes John replies back and says, oh, yeah, that'd be great. Can you share it with me? Then your virtual assistant, your team says, no problem. Okay, I'll send it to you. Here you go. And remember how I said, ask, don't tell? Instead of just giving John the link that he asked for, you end that same message with a question where it is, let me know what you think of it. Question mark. So, hey, John, here's that episode you asked for. After you get a chance listening to it, just let me know what you think. Question mark. When John replies and says, oh my gosh, that was a really valuable episode. I learned these things. The next thing is that you have your team say, because remember those first 5 things, where the 4th one was that they do the social proof, rate and review the podcast. That's why you go back, and after they say that they liked it, then you'll say something to the effect of, that is beautiful what you just said, if that's the case. Now, this isn't exact template. It's personalized. But you might say something that was beautiful what you just said. You should copy and paste that and give that person a written review. you should copy and paste that as a written review. Or you'll say something like, there's so many ways to do it, but that's a great way for you to keep this concise for you. I loved how you said that. I think you should copy and paste that and put that in a review to her. And then the fifth and final of those first 5 things we talked about was for that person, John in this case, to keep coming back to the podcast. So all you do is you reach back out to John a month later, 3 weeks later, whenever an incredibly valuable episode comes out. It might even be a day later. But let's just say on average, it's 2 to 3 weeks after that other message. You can see how this takes a little bit of time if you're going to be doing it right. You'll reach back out to John and you'll say, hey, John, did you just hear that episode that dropped from the XYZ podcast today? ? That was awesome, wasn't it? ? So this helps to support John after he's also already started following, downloading some of the episodes, listening because you're asking for feedback on each episode. So John has to listen, rating and reviewing because you're basically saying what you just said was awesome. You should copy and paste that and put it into written review for him or her. And now you're coming back a few weeks after that and saying, hey, John, did you hear that last episode that just dropped? That was epic, wasn't it ? As you do this strategy, I believe wholeheartedly, because we've seen it with the clients we work with my own podcast, I believe wholeheartedly you're going to see some insane value where your podcast gets a ton of traction. It starts ranking in the top charts, top 10%, top 5%, top 1%, top 0.5% even as you work through the strategy. Best of luck. Thank you. This episode is brought to you by GrowYourShow.com. Grow Your Show lets you be the star of your show while we handle all the hard stuff. We offer reliable and affordable post-production services that allow you to grow your show organically without all the work. So go ahead and check out the website right now and feel free to schedule a call with me and let's take your show to the next level. Again, GrowYourShow.com. You just press record. We handle the rest.